Alright, so this morning I have someone who has messaged and asked if he has a character model in Model Studio that clearly has multiple weapons, like a bow and also an axe. He's wondering how can he hide the axe in all the animations except attack alternate, um, or how can he do something like that? Is the axe behind his back in some animations and his hand in other animations, like if he wants to switch weapons. So let's see if we can do this. I think I tend to jump between Reforged and not Reforged in my stuff, so I gotta go back to Reforged over here. So pardon me for a moment if I think I have to click over there, something like that, and reload. I had some non-Reforged version of Warcraft loaded on my Model Studio. There we go. So change back to the Reforged version. Let's see if we can reconstruct something similar to what this guy was doing. Now, one of the interesting things that I really think is worth giving a mention to here, a lot of the times when I muck around with these kind of Warcraft models, I'm using the Model Studio version from the one basically that I made, and there's a fork that's a fan-made fork that has a bunch of buttons and settings that aren't in mine. So for anybody who's not already aware of this, I think a lot of people already know, there's a version called Twi'lek fork of Model Studio, and it's almost a completely different program at this point. So one way to solve his problem is that I think in the Twi'lek version, if you go to model and you go to like geosets and you find, militia shield geoset here, when I click on this on my version, it doesn't have any data for the shield geoset because I didn't bother to make that system actually do anything. I was just kind of lazy. And in the Twi'lek version, they actually made it that when you're viewing the sort of tabular components of the model like this, you can just click on, militia shield geoset, and you can click on like attack alternate, and you can click not visible or visible, and that's fairly convenient. So I didn't bother to make that level of convenience. A lot of the time I've been working on other things. I have in my mind the workarounds. I know what buttons to click to essentially accomplish that same outcome. And so in a world where I already know how to do that, it was less important for me to make those settings because I do already know how to do that, right? So I guess just as maybe a quick example, if I'm in here and I just hit the hotkey. So the F hotkey does this, but you can use the buttons too. My computer's going a little slow today, so I'm not sure if that'll show up in the recording. Maybe it'll be some lag. But I'm clicking this orange ball with the streaks up there in the top bar. I think sometimes if you mouse over it, it might say select nodes and animate. There we go, select nodes and animate. Now inside of that, having clicked that button, down in the very lower right-hand corner, and you notice this button's in a different place in the Twi'lek fork, but in the very lower right-hand corner, we have these different animations. Or we have the ability to select which animation we're editing. And so this is kind of an animation editor that I made a few years ago, and kind of just hacked into it. One of the things it has is a duplicate button, so you can duplicate an animation. So I could say instead of attack 1, suppose I want to have attack alternate. Now I really am getting some lag today. It's kind of interesting how much lag we're actually getting. Let me just fix my typo there. Attack alternate. Okay, so you make something like attack alternate, and obviously, I mean, if you just copy it, it looks totally the same. But what we're saying we want to do is make the shield actually disappear in that animation, right? And so that's kind of annoying not to be able to just do that. You'd want to really have like a button that would just do that. And there's really some lag going on here. It's interesting. So one of the things you would want to do, I'm actually using a computer that has no graphics card, so that gives me some lag. If you were using a computer that has a graphics card, that's actually a much better way to deal with Reforged graphics. Anyway, ignoring that for a moment. So we have this problem that obviously in attack alternate that we just created, that the shield does not disappear. So I was sort of extraordinarily lazy when building Model Studio. I already knew how this stuff works. So if you go into the text view of the model and you go into attack alternate, you can see that this starts at time 142967. Now, keeping in mind in the model tab that the militia shield is actually geoset 5, and the geoset 1 is labeled 1, but in computers numbers start at 0, so geoset 5 is actually geoset 4. If I go down to geoset anims, and we look at this geoset animation data, and you see there's geoset 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 here being that one. If we paste actually the time, and it might be, oh yeah, it's already there even. Okay. These ones are visibility data saying 1 is visible and 0 is not visible. And if I change that to 0, and I apply this back, and then we go back to the edit tab, or honestly my edit tab is lagging, so let's check my view tab here. You look at attack 1, and he's got his shield, and he's got his sword. And you look at attack alternate, and now he only has his sword. So one of the reasons I never made a really convenient button for this is I always felt like I knew exactly how to do it. That fundamentally there is, and I've tried to almost make a viewer for this, I didn't finish writing. You can look at something like this concept of a timeline track, and so down at the bottom of my screen, maybe you can't hardly see the numbers, but if we look at all of the model data and animations, is just one giant timeline that just has tags in it. So like from this time to this time is stand, and from that time to that time is stand 2. There's all this, it's just basically a giant timeline cut into pieces, and somewhere throughout that timeline and you can, I made like a little scale function to try to help us read this stuff, but somewhere towards the end, oh there we go, okay, so now I scaled it too small, but out past the end of this, after he like dies and fades away or whatever, so this is like halfway into his decay, I can actually draw a line that shows when things are visible and when they're not visible, and so we can use that as sort of a rudimentary way of editing that, and we can see that in attack alternate that I created here, we have this sort of not visible flag, and if you look at the weapon timeline, it is visible, and so that's kind of the way that to think about how this is stored, right? It's like a large timeline cut into pieces, and each section is labeled as an animation, and the sections can be any length that you want, and within that section, we can tag that in attack alternate there's a separate timeline for shield geoset, and there's a separate timeline for weapon geoset. And so that essentially causes them to be visible or not visible. And I understood all of this, and I was working towards building this, and then I sort of stopped. And so because I sort of stopped, there isn't, you can click these and drag them around and like break it or something, you can drag select, and I think you can even delete. But the option to actually right click and add one of these timeline elements to sort of hide or show, or you would imagine ideally you'd want to be able to double click one of these and maybe just change it. Is it visible or is it not visible? Or honestly, if it's like the decay animation, you might want it 50% visible. When you look at one of these, I don't know if we'll be able to see it here. I think maybe sometimes my program doesn't preview it identical to Reforged, but if you've seen in the game in Reforged, when one of these units falls over dead, they have a fading time where they will actually sort of slowly fade away as opposed to just instantaneously disappearing. I think in my system they just instantaneously disappear because I'm reading the don't interpolate mode in the style of SD graphics, and when they made the Reforged graphics they just hacked it to be always linear fade or something like that. It's a little bit different than what I'm used to, and I didn't feel like changing it. So basically in what's going on in mine, I don't render that unless if you actually were to go into the data over here and actually go where we were just playing with Geoset 4, for example, and if you actually tell it to do a linear fade, so like Reforged, they were in a big hurry, they didn't really understand the model format, and so fundamentally I think the SD graphics work the old way, and the new graphics are like modified to always apply linear fade or something. So by telling it to linear fade, you might actually be able to see it in my program. But I guess I only applied that to the shield, so it might be that the shield would fade out slowly, and the rest of him would not. Maybe not. Maybe not. Actually, there might be some other setting. I think probably that fade would sometimes be. Reforged models also sometimes put it on the material data instead of the geoset. Oh yeah, okay. So maybe it's fading now. Can we see anything through it? I don't think so. Alright, well you could imagine there are some settings that used to affect linear fade, and I think on Reforged everything is just all the time linear fade, and I'm just rendering it wrong inside of Model Studio or something like that. But probably reasonably straightforward to manipulate that. Obviously, if you were actually going to use this model, maybe you want to leave it how it was and be consistent with sort of that universe. So we kind of talked about this idea of what's really going on, if we didn't have automation, if we just had a timeline, and according to my understanding, um, back in the days before Reforged, when the original Frozen Throne was made, this kind of timeline with the on and offs here that put through time, tagged with the animation names, cut into sections. If we look at the old Warcraft 3 art tools that was released in 2005 for the Frozen Throne, where they actually published the tools and the program code that was used to make all of the character models in the original Frozen Throne game, we can actually see that they used a 3ds Max tool called Track View Dope Sheet that actually looks almost identical to what I had started making in Retro Model Studio here and never finished. So with that in mind, like conceptually, that system is the system, right? I mean, that is, if you wanted to have the ultimate power over that, you would want to have that interface. And unfortunately, that interface is proprietary. And also, I think it was Autodesk bought it and did a bunch of updates, so you can't actually use the original thing anymore. So, gosh knows how the Reforged models were made. Some data showed they were probably made in some kind of Maya exporter, but in concept, in how these things are actually stored when they go into the Warcraft game, there's a timeline, and chunks of that timeline have hiding and showing. So then the question really becomes, if you want ease of use, if you want something automated, you want to go really fast, right? You don't want to be, like, I'm making this really slow video where I talk through this stuff, but if you're trying to get things done, I mean, you pretty much want something, like when I click duplicate animation, a person wants a duplicate animation button or something like that, and then they want a way to, hide the shield or something. So I think to that end, let's talk about if I was going to take this militia and I was going to initially just give him a bow. So one of the things I would do if I was just going to give him a bow, when we're going to actually edit these Reforged models, you want to start with the delete logs function. There's this extra data in Reforged models that it just slows everything down and wastes time, called logs. And if you delete those, things are they're just a little bit easier. It's just going to run a little bit faster. It doesn't change anything in the model. So we've deleted the superfluous Reforged data now. And I'm saying if I want to actually make this model into an archer, who then we're going to give a little axe to, one of the ways to do that is to start off by actually deleting his weapon. So we can look at his shield, we can look at his sword, and we can say if he is going to be an archer, we do not need the sword and shield, and so you just kind of drag select those. I like to push the delete key. Obviously you can also use edit, delete over here. Delete those. Once you delete the geometry, the geoset groups over here will be automatically deleted. And now you have this guy. He's just a guy, and obviously he's got some stupid animations. He looks like he's waving a sword that isn't really there. And we want different animations. We want him to operate independent from that. So then you kind of have to ask this question of, whose bow and arrow are you going to try to give to him? And so if I float around and think about, maybe we'll take the bow and arrow from the generic elven archer. So the elf is going to have the advantage that it probably looks human, maybe a little bit less like a night elf. Alright, now that I'm saying it, actually that bow is too fancy for a militia, so I am incorrect. Maybe we want some other character. I guess you could imagine, obviously, whoever asked this question had already figured this out. They had some bow they were using. I don't particularly pretend to know which bow they were using. But let's check out just a night elf archer. Surely that would be a wooden bow, right? That might be a decent one. It might be purple, but it's a wooden bow. Alright, so let's try to use that wooden bow. So one of the things that happens on the Reforged models, I originally wrote my software for transferring animations between classic graphics models, and so for me that was always kind of straightforward, because if you had a character like this and they're holding a bow, in the old days in the classic graphics, the actual bow was basically linked to the hand of the character, and so if we take the geometry of that bow, dump it into the militia, and then tell the militia to move in a manner likewise matching this archer, you'd get a pretty good result. And unfortunately, on Reforged, that is no longer true. Because these things were made sort of in a hurry, exported out of Maya, they tended to create duplicate data that would end up looking the same inside of Warcraft 3, but use more processing, rather than upgrading the game engine to actually sort of store the original information in a way that would be more straightforward. So it's a little bit like when you edit Reforged graphics, you're sort of reverse engineering something, versus where when you edit Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne graphics, you're kind of looking more at something much closer, in my opinion, to the original source material. So to that end, when we look at this character and we look at the bow that they're holding, I'm pretty sure, and I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that if we go into nodes and how the animations work, and you know what, again, for performance, especially because my computer's lagging a little bit, I'm going to click that delete mods button. It's just going to nuke anything that doesn't matter. It's sort of the data that doesn't matter. We delete that. Yeah, here you go. So in the node tree, historically, on Frozen Throne data, there would probably just be one root of the archer. The entire Night Elf archer would just be one thing, and that thing was the sort of the root of the character, and all the animations inherited from that. If the character moved around, it would be kind of one conjoined part. In Reforged, they kind of split it into parts, and so you have sort of this pelvis part that is the legs, the supposed turret part that is like the top half, and some of that other stuff going on with the, her sort of cape thing, and then like the weapon and the arrow. And so essentially, where this gets into trouble is that if you try to animation transfer this, the data is no longer relative to her hand. It is relative to a fixed point in space that it programs a mimic of her hand, so that when the hand moves, it just so happens that the location of the hand, manages to coincide with the location of the bow by encoding both of them instead of encoding one as a derivative of the other. So at some point in recent times, after years and years of goobers trying to mod Reforged, who would sit around and sort of try to manually grab the bow and shovel it around, and a lot of the times, because they had these independent data, they would create the data with a large volume of redundant data. So if you try to go in and manually change it, it becomes this huge waste of time. Rather than to waste my time with that, about 6-8 months ago, I think it was originally for April Fool's Day. Maybe I was sort of making fun of people who edit Reforged, but then I realized you can sort of take it seriously. It actually works. I created a technology that if I go into the right-click menu, we used to have set parent, and so you can imagine taking the weapon and just binding it to the hand, and it would break all of its animations, because if you bind the weapon to the hand, then we're looking at a situation where the fixed point in space that is the animation data of the weapon, this sort of duplicate data that wouldn't even have been there originally, it all becomes totally wrong. It's relative to the origin point of something that is not bound to anything else. And as soon as you bind it to anything else, it's totally wrong. So we can't set parent, but what we can do is relink Bone's Reforged weapon, which is this function I added to basically, knowing that it's stupid in that way, knowing that it's kind of, we're almost like reversing out the motion data into something relative. We can actually perform that relink and attach the weapon of the archer onto the hand of the archer, and then when we transfer the archer's animation information to the militia, the weapon will be linked to the hand of the militia. I don't know, maybe this is what everybody does in Reforged now. Maybe they all thought of this before I did. It might be that I'm stating the obvious for people who spend all their time Reforged modding. But I think it's kind of fun to talk through it. So if I take this weapon bind joint and I want it to go to, it should be like bone hand left, I think, right? It should exist somewhere. Bone hand left, here we go. Relinking that will eliminate one of these 4 root components over here on the left, while simultaneously, and it takes some time processing. I don't even know, it might even lag the audio of me talking. But when it finishes, yeah, okay, I don't know, maybe there's some lag. It might even be lagging recording me talking, but when that finishes, one of the 4 fundamental root components of our character is now not a root component. It's a derivative, a subset of everything else. And yet, the animation data should pretty much be the same. So the difference is now, whenever her hand moves, the bow moves likewise. We have basically computationally created an identical 3D file, but with a different storage format. And by doing that, the storage format is more similar to classic Warcraft 3, classic models, and also the storage format could more easily transfer between character models. Now, In my opinion, we should probably do the same thing to the arrow, although I think it is a little bit harder to determine where would that arrow link to that's less likely to break when going between models. You can tell that it seems to be sort of definitely aligned between both her left and right hand. So I'm a little bit skeptical of myself. Sort of like which hand would you link that arrow to? You could imagine that if the height of the character, if the width of the arms of the militia does not exactly match, his fingers are not going to be perfectly wrapped around that bowstring. Probably, for the sake of simplicity, and this is maybe partly me just giving it a try here, seeing how things go. I'm inclined to think we should go to the arrow and then use our technology and this relink bone function and link the arrow to the left hand likewise. And so just everything will be in that left hand when we do a transfer. And you'll see where I'm going with this here, hopefully pretty soon. It's a pretty slow process. So the reason this is slow is, again, that in a classic model, there might be no animation data for the bow. It might be that the bow just moves whenever the hand moves, and the hand has a little bit of data. If the character's running, the hand, might fly by the side and forward and backward, and if the character's standing still, maybe the hand's not moving very much. A lot of the time in Reforged models, because they're just in a hurry, they're kind of just hacking something together back in 2020, the data for the motion of the hand and for the bow is immensely complicated, because it's essentially like many repeated exports of the location, because the developers didn't actually trust the game engine to interpolate, or essentially didn't really trust the game engine to understand the art files. And so instead of that, it's sort of like this hack that, assuming that the game engine won't know where to position the model, they just store, almost like a frame-by-frame bunch of different positions where it should go, instead of where it starts and where it ends, and letting the game engine interpolate between the two. Which, of course, is one of the reasons that Reforged graphics probably always have really bad frame rate, among other things, because we're sort of wasting all this compute power so that we can make the game in a hurry instead of understanding really well. So anyway, because of that, my technology here is sort of reversing that back and going to all of those different frames and then linking them up. So I think that should be good. I would imagine that the attack animation here probably looks completely identical to what it did before. But what's going to happen now is that if we do our transfer and we put these animations into the militia, we will now have the advantage that his bow will look totally identical to this and be linked onto his hand in a manner likewise to how it is linked to the archer. So if we go back to our militia here, and now we talk about, I kind of explain this idea of there's a timeline of things being visible and invisible. Another reason that, unlike the Twi'lek fork, where they were really smart about this, and they made just a setting that you can just pick a part of the model and pick an animation and turn it on and off, I was always in the habit of trying to sort of do everything at once, a big combined import process. And so what I mean by that is I would look at my archer, and I would look at my militia, and I would say, what I want to do is just dump the archer into the militia, and have the militia have the archer's animations, and have the militia have the archer's bow, and just kind of think of that as one operation, where then I can have a little machine that I wrote the code for that knows how to do that operation. It just makes everything work. So to go along with that, we can look at the archer and we can say, really the only parts of the geometry here that we need are going to be the bow and the quiver. And so we know that this is geosets 6 to 10 in the archer over here, and that's going to be important when I bring those into the militia. That 6 to 10 from the archer are 3D graphics that we want to bring in, and everything else that I want to bring in is the animation data. But by doing this file import, and I don't know, it might be at a too high of a resolution, so maybe this is a little bit difficult to see, but I just clicked on File, and I clicked on Import, and I clicked on Workspace, and then I chose the Archer model that we just edited in the workspace to have these different, this different format to be easier to transfer. By doing that, I should be able to just open up the Import menu, and essentially just bring the Archer components into the militia, probably. barring anything that I've forgotten. And a time or two, sometimes I end up repeating this process, but hopefully not. So if we go into this, if I leave all, so we assume most Archer 3D art is left behind, but we want to get 6 through 10, so 6 is a weapon, 7 is a weapon, 8 is a weapon, and it even tells us 9 is a weapon, 10 is a weapon. While we're doing this, be sure not to click over here on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, if I click something different, this is actually selecting. You can see, oh, maybe we can't see. Sometimes, like if I'm in the militia or something, it'll tag as original. So if you select something other than the original, this is choosing the texture and surfacing to put over the 3D art, in case you wanted to actually transfer those. A lot of the times people don't want to transfer those. So I'm literally transferring texture and surfacing is staying the same. I'm leaving it on whatever was already selected. And I'm bringing over those sort of components of the Archer. As far as animation data, we pretty much want to clear pre-existing animations, and we're just going to use the Archer's animations, would be my thought, for this militia. He's just going to walk around like an Archer and move in a manner similar to an Archer. I think that makes sense. For that to work, there are some side effects of that. So in the actual bones, here we have basically all the animation data. Is this sort of, they call it skeletal animation, right? It's a tree of nodes that almost looks like a skeleton. It's in the shape of the character, and that stores how they move. So, like, basically, almost all of these things, we want to transfer and basically write into the peasant, or right into the militia, the way to move, but leave the militia with the structure he had. The place where we don't want to do that is going to be for the weapon geometry of the Archer, where we actually want to bring the geometry, but also bring its animation data. And if we do this right, of course, we can do both of those simultaneously and have it really line up, hopefully pretty nicely. So the way that I would tend to do that, if you look at the quiver and the arrow and the bow and the bowstring, all of that stuff, and I guess quiver is attached to the chest, the weapon now is attached to hand left. One of the things that we're going to want to change, I did this sort of nice thing where I went to the weapon and linked it to hand left, but we now want to link it to the malicious hand left during this import process. And that's where the fact that we made it a part of the old Archer tree by rewriting all that data means that it's relative to hand. And so at this point that we're changing the linking, as you can sort of rewrite the tree during this import process, we're going to make that bow relative to the hand of the militia as we bring it in. Similar to that, I think the arrow, I did the same thing. So we're going to want to tag the arrow to the militia hand left rather than the Archer hand left. Outside of that, if you think about, you can do Control A to select all. Basically, all except the quiver, the arrows in the back of the quiver, the weapon, the bowstring, and the arrow attached to the weapon. All the rest of this stuff in the Archer, we want to click on Import Motion to Pre-Existing. And so it's a different kind of operation. It's basically writing over how the militia's body animates, as opposed to actually bringing in new components that animate on their own. Now, most of the stuff, I don't think we'll have to change it. I think it should be just kind of writing to what was already there. You could imagine maybe the cape of the Archer, you could try to have it right to the skirt of the militia, and, I'm not exactly sure if that's something we really want to care about or need to do. And it's always kind of unfortunate to not be totally sure. So the little sort of skirt or whatever of the militia is attached to his main body, whereas the this Archer stuff is attached to a back. And so the animations probably don't line up. It might be that the smarter thing is to just ignore it and hope that the little skirt thing doesn't clip into his body very much. So I think for the sake of example, I might do that. If you want to get really complicated, essentially this menu is, like I said, I sort of Control A, do everything and at once, and hopefully that works. But it allows you, hopefully, a sort of scalable level of complexity. Similar to that, matrices here is actually saying what parts of the model is connected to what, and you could hope that these things are all already correct. So the Archer components are attached to the new parts we're bringing in, the militia components are attached to what they were before, and that kind of just stays the same. I guess as far as then there's this objects tab, a lot of times the objects tab, most of the stuff in it is like the attachment points we could probably ignore because they're already, sort of, you could think of it as attachment points are defining places where you'd attach an orb of fire if you pick it up or something like that. And those are, there's a set of those for the archer and there's a set of those for the militia. And so even if we're bringing in the archer's ways of moving, the archer's ways of walking, the militia, you want that to just keep the same, where his head is located is correct. Now, Reforged added something where there's this attachment point called SPN, which is, in my opinion, not very good. I think that SPNs should have stayed as event objects like in Classic Warcraft 3. I haven't spent a whole lot of time looking at that in Reforged. I kind of just like to ignore them, but for now we could probably just assume that we'll leave in the SPN that was in the militia, and maybe in a perfect world we would sort of tweak that to make sure he doesn't like shoot out blood during his archer animations or something. This War 3 Classic Particle, I think, is for the one of like Scan Victory or something. It probably doesn't matter, but we can go ahead and keep it. This is Sound D Ran, means Death Ranger. As far as the Archer Death Sound, we could probably keep it, but we'll have to do some tweaking with that. Kind of similar with these. It's almost like a missing feature of my program that ideally you would want to have these sort of footprints of the Archer. You'd want to have their time data pasted into the footprints of the militia because his footprints should still be the same size. And then I guess we have these collision objects, which are just used for mouse intersecting the guy, like when you click on him, which we don't really care about, so I'm going to skip that and keep the original militia ones. So hopefully that's pretty good. I guess the other thing that we want to do here is to make sure that the militia main diffuse layer uses the main diffuse layer of the archer for visibility or something like that. Now there seems to be some kind of issue with this, that they're like sharing when they shouldn't share, but hopefully all of this stuff just uses archer main diffuse layer and then maybe archer hair for the militia hair, and then I guess similar to that, the corpse of the militia should show up when the corpse of the archer shows up. So that one we can probably just say something like that, link it to. It seems like there's kind of an issue also going on with when I click either of these, they're named the same, and so the second one shows the data of the first. I kind of thought that bug was fixed years ago, but it looks like it wasn't. So that's another thing to kind of watch out for. Hopefully not too crazy there. I guess we could, this is a good idea. You can try to tell the spawns to use the spawn of the other spawn's data. If that's possible, it's a good idea. I think the rest of these things are just always visible. If you were combining animations, sometimes you'd want to say not visible in something like this classic particle to make sure the particle doesn't show up in militia animations, but because I checked the box for clear pre-existing animations, this is probably just going to delete all the militia animations. Hopefully it just works. Cool. So here you can see, now I have a militia who thinks he's an archer. I just clicked finish on that. And it's not perfect. It's actually less perfect than I was hoping it would be, but I wonder, surely it's not super far off from what we want it to be. Oh, here's another interesting thing. Okay, so the quiver on his back probably has a similar issue to the other stuff. And I didn't think to attach the quiver correctly. So that kind of is dumb. Basically, when we're bringing this over, I think I forgot to do this. The quiver should not be its own floating thing. Basically, the quiver on the back should have its linkings assigned to the back of the militia, so that when the militia moves, it moves with him. And this is probably something that the guy who asked me this question had already figured out, I would think. But obviously you want that like linked to the militia, and I sort of think it looks like it's, if we compare where it's situated versus where it's situated here, on her, she's much taller, and so the quiver expected to be only up to her shoulder. On this militia, it's like shooting up into the air, and that's probably why it looks kind of bad. So for that one, we might want to go to basically just select like the entire quiver or something. and maybe also everything it's associated with. Just get like all of that, and try to lower it down. So that the back of the quiver is more closely aligned to the back of our guy, and hopefully that would line up pretty well. So it might look good in the animations. We could hope. Something like that. And then I'll still have to figure out the bow, which is apparently messed up. And I'm not quite sure why the bow is messed up, because we went through all that trouble to try to make it relative to the hand geometry, and somehow that doesn't seem to have worked at all. Okay, so the quiver was pretty simple, because the quiver is actually just, sort of attached to the back. So that seems good. Yeah, Stand Victory is maybe kind of messed up. But it's not very clear to me why the bow does not situate in his hand. Oh, wait, there is a reason why. Okay, this is probably easy to fix. Alright, so the bow actually just has the same problem as what we just saw with the quiver. That's easier to fix than I was thinking, which is great. So if you go to left shoulder, and you go to left arm, you go to left hand, and then you figure out what left arm, bone, hand, left, there's a point here where we have the weapon and the arrow. And so we can essentially grab all of that as this component, and then if you turn on visualization of the guy, so you can actually see his hand, you can put the bow in his hand. And all that other work we did before basically makes it that if you put the bow in his hand, and I'm really not too happy about the render lag here, but if you put the bow in his hand, then it should start to look really good. That's the advantage of what I was doing with the animation. So if you can find his hand over there, and just sort of put the bow in that hand, then what will happen is the movement of the bow is aligned to the movement of the hand, which is not how these things operate by default, but it's how they operate from us rewriting the animation to match what we want. And here I'm just trying to position a little better to see if I can have that better align over here. It's still not perfect, but I would say it's definitely getting better. Alright, so I'm gonna try to move this inward a little bit. I think it's getting hopefully pretty good. Getting to where it basically looks like he's holding it. I mean, one of the interesting things here, right, is this idea that if you're viewing this from a bird's eye view, you hardly notice the details, but obviously it's unfortunate that his hand is not totally grabbing that the way maybe you would want. But I guess one of the keys here becomes the attack animation. And you can see it's really close, because we made the bow relative to his hand. But what I didn't do was make the bow, make the other side correctly interface with his other hand, which is sort of unfortunate, and I think a little bit difficult to fix, because the length of his arms just isn't the same. I might be able to do something with it, but you can tell it's really close. So I mean, I would, honestly, if it was me and I was just having fun with some friends, I'd be really tempted to just use this how it is, because it's so close to what you would want. You know what I mean? Like, the basic premise is really all there. You get a guy like that, and it's going to look pretty good. Here's our guy. He's running around. And from a distance, it looks pretty good. And then somebody's going to notice, like, oh, his hand is not actually on the bowstring. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's true. But outside of that, things are pretty good. And so I guess, one way you could try to fix that would probably be to see, is there a way you could change the size of the bow so that it would line up, given that we've already aligned it to the left hand. We don't have to do that sort of work manually. Maybe manually changing the bow size to line up could sort of solve it. But when you get that to how you like, and I think that's fairly straightforward to figure out, a bow geometry. When we talk about a character like this that has, now he's animated, he's this different kind of character, we've customized him to have a different weapon, and then somebody says, how do I give him 2 weapons? And I'm also curious, while I'm looking at this, did our transfer work correctly so that during decay flesh he turns into bones? So that'd be something, of course, you'd always want to check. But while that's running, I can just talk a little bit. So we have this other question of, can we give him an axe? Can we make a second animation where he has, like a grunt axe or something. And my take would be that I absolutely can do that. Basically, if I want to make a second animation where he's got the axe, hey, look at that, he turned into bones. So we've got our fade correctly too. Another thing that's always really good, if you get a model like this where you think I could probably use this in the game, even though there's probably some bug with it you'd run into and something you'd want to patch. A lot of times, what I would do is save the work. Militia with bow. Saving your work is always a fun thing to do to make sure you don't lose data. So now I have this militia with a bow. That's pretty good. But let's say that we want him to have a stand alternate where he actually fights with the axe like a grunt. So we've got this guy, he's got a bow, and if you imagine him fighting with an axe like a grunt and stand alternate, it would make a lot of sense for him to have the axe on his back until he gets to that animation, right? I think that would make sense. So if I go to a grunt, and I want to think about doing that, really the process of what I would do with the grunt is just about the same as what you'd want to do with the archer. The only problem, I guess, is that the axe here is in his left hand, and I'm sort of envisioning that he would have an axe in his right hand, which is kind of interesting. So it does create the question, is there a character who already has an axe in their right hand that would be simpler and faster to transfer from? There probably is. I don't actually remember where the axe that the guy asking us this question got his axe from, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of these, bandit guys or something had, a bandit axe. Maybe a lot of Warcraft characters are left-handed. But yeah, okay, this guy's right-handed. So how about that? How about this bandit axe? We could use that. I almost wonder, is one of the other... The brigand is... How do I not remember that? Yeah, okay. I think if, Enforcer has a better axe or something. Maybe not. Maybe all I'm doing is just running up my computer and opening files. Oh yeah, his axe is a lot fancier. Alright, well let's do file close on this guy. Save some resources. File close, file close. File close. File close. File close. Okay, so how about the base bandit? We can just use the bandit axe. So, secret to the bandit axe here is going to be that, being again a Reforged model, it will have been encoded in that kind of nonsensical way that makes it harder to do transfers, probably. Maybe not. How does that work? So, hand left. This is weird to me. So the organization of this model has got some weird stuff going on. It looks like his left hand is independent of his body. And again, this is one of those ideas that I look at that and I think, whose idea was that? If it was me, I would probably go to his left hand and I would say, why don't we just relink that with our linking script so that it's linked to his left arm. How much does he have a left arm? So if we go, spine, left shoulder, okay, so he's got a left shoulder, he's got a left upper arm, this goes to the left lower arm, this goes to another left lower arm. So basically left lower arm twist 01 is the deepest it goes, and then beyond that, his hand is detached, which is why. There's probably some reason, but I think it's stupid. When I'm doing animation transfers, these things are built for connected things. So left lower arm twist, whatever, that thing. We're going to link it to that thing. Okay, so we're jumping one tree and the other tree now. We're going to want to do the same thing with the right hand. And then there's something with the helve and the shield. It looks like they have some similar oddities going on here. So, the shield also apparently is geometrically stored on the wrong of the two hands, which is another sort of fascinating Reforged idea. It must just mean that its animation data warps it across the guy in all animations. Okay, so then we go to, and then it's back to, there's another way to deal with that. Maybe we just delete the shield. But let's at least fix the right hand, because the right hand's going to have the same problem. Cool. So here's his right hand. And we want to relink. I'm used to using that set parent, but we want to use the special relink that rewrites the animations. Relink right hand to link to right, whatever is the most deepest that it goes, with the right lower arm twist bind joint. Okay. So we link that. So now he's got kind of this idea that is a more standard, a tree. It starts from the center and goes out the outsides. And then there's this thing about the helve. So I'm pretty sure the helve is actually the weapon. Would be my guess. And I could be wrong about that. What is a helve? So I guess if you want to know if I'm wrong about that, it used to be you could select the weapon and use tools view selected. Yeah, okay. So what I was calling the axe is apparently called the helve in the data. So if we just turn off all the nodes, make them all go away, and we turn on the helve, and we turn off the subsections of the helve. So just the helve, just the top level. My thought process would be that we want to relink the helve again with the animation rewriting relink, and we want to stick that to his right hand. And basically he's got the right finger joints, right upper arm, right lower arm. So basically right hand. So that basically when we transfer all of this, it's again like the archer, where as the hand moves, the helve moves, and we have sort of the same transfer. One could hope, and in theory that should not have destroyed this model in any way. It's just rewriting it so it'll be easier to transfer. So now, when he moves his hand, or whatever's going on there, and you can see there's definitely some animation on that axe, like the little, the little wavy part hanging down, it's like moving a bit and stuff like that. So all of that should be relative to his right hand now, which should mean that we can transfer that into a militia and that it would be the same way. So that seems pretty reasonable. If we go back to the militia over here, we could do our transfer import from workspace and pick this bandit, and hopefully that'll be fairly straightforward then to do that, to get the helve into his hand. Sometimes the loading takes a little time. It's processing all of the components to try to build a transfer, but on the upside, it means we can transfer whatever we want. So we can make a model where he's got, the hand and the little thing in his hand, hopefully. Oh, this is why it took a long time, because I didn't do delete logs on the bandit. That's really stupid. Alright, well anyway, if we leave all on the bandit, you can imagine primarily, here's bandit weapon 01. I'm not sure. Yeah, it looks like weapon 01 is not the shield. So that's what we want. So 8 and 9 is not 10. Okay. So that's pretty good. Basically, what we want to do, import and rename all on the animations and just type alternate in the box. And then you can have like stand alternate and, attack alternate, walk alternate. And these are all these animations of him holding. I guess you can have defend alternate if you really want it. That are him with these other sort of bandit style things going on there. And you have literally all the bandit animations available that way. As far as what we copy versus what we transfer, I think anything to do with the helve. So the helve was attached to our hand. So in this case, we want to link this to hand right in the militia. Other than that, the other stuff below the helve is all attached to the helve. I think we're going to do another one of these Control A and then unselect the helve portion. And for all the other stuff in the bandit, just do motion to pre-existing. Just dump that into the militia. But this time, we're dumping it into stand alternate that we're creating, as opposed to dumping it into his existing animations. So now he'll be able to animate both ways, which seems kind of nice. And I think in that one, this is another one where we don't want any of the attachment points, because that's sort of silly. We don't want any of the collisions and cameras. And maybe we could get these bandit footprints. I mean, that seems fine. So then he'll have like the bandit death sound or something like that. That's probably fine. And then we go over here to visibility data. So the visibility data, this is an interesting one because obviously the original request that we were given, we want to have the axe in his right hand actually maybe be on his belt or something outside of these animations. Now, one way that Reforged would do that would be to actually write, sort of like I was doing with this rewriting function that writes how something moves relative to something else. You could imagine creating a sequence of animations where his axe is on his belt, but it is there by way of an animation that transfers, at the start of every animation, it's written into the animation that it's taking that same axe and it's moving it to his belt and re-encoding the entire movement of his belt with the axe, so it just floats next to it. And rather than re-encoding all of it, rather than dumping all that data in, I mean, if you look at like classic Warcraft 3 and like the way that people would have historically done this, in maybe a little bit better performance, they would just have two axes. They would have belt axe and they would have hand axe. And when you go to an animation where the axe is on your belt, you just hide hand axe and show belt axe. And by doing that, neither of them has any animation data because the belt axe is just using the belt motion and the hand axe is using the hand motion. So the game engine doesn't have to recompute, the belt floating next, the hand axe floating next to the belt in every animation when he's not supposed to have it in his hand. These sort of reforgedisms that just assume infinite compute power, you can sort of get away from, and you can make something simpler. So we could do that using the animation rewriting function. I mean, if you think about what that means and how it works, it should also be possible, I think, to basically construct in an automated way an animation of his belt having an axe on it that moves with the belt and then transfer that. So you could do it in that sort of reforgedism way if you wanted, but I don't think I want to. I think that what I would want to do is just have a belt axe that just shows up in some of the animations. And so we don't have that in that transfer we're doing right now, so I'm just going to ignore it. So I'm going to say in existing animations, the axe is not visible. And I think, honestly, in a similar way, for the bow and the quiver, if we just want to make this kind of straightforward for the sake of example, we can click not visible in those 5 geoset blocks we imported from the archer. By doing that, and I guess also we want to tell the archer's bow particle is not visible, and maybe tell the blood spawning thing would be not visible. I don't think the bandit had an equivalent one to copy from. We do something like that. What that should mean is that most of the stuff ends up how we want. I guess the one other thing I didn't do yet, that maybe we want to think about, is the militia sort of like main components here. We want them to inherit from bandit body stuff. And I think that's similar to maybe this thing that has hair. If we have like a bandit hair to inherit from, while I was opening this drop down, I accidentally clicked the thing below, but you don't need to change that. So yeah, we want to get bandit hair. Maybe they don't even have bandit hair, so we just copy from bandit body if we made it all one file. I think similar to that, you could make the corpse portion copy from the bandit corpse portion just to try to see if that works. The archer stuff probably don't have to care about because we already are down here in the geoset controls are hiding the bow in the bandit animations. And again, you could do the same thing with a belt bow if you wanted. You could also say, do we want this guy when he's using the axe to still have the quiver on his back? Maybe we do. So by default there, I was going in the direction of just hiding it. But the first 2 archer portions are the quiver. So we could actually go to geoset 7 and 8 here. And we could go where I said not visible in the import, and we could say visible in the import, and then we'll have the quiver, but he won't have the bow. If we finish that, we should be able to hopefully see it. Hopefully I'm not crazy. And I guess the last thing that you would want to do here probably is to go to If we turn off all the nodes and then we just go to right hand and we turn on, probably turn off all the geometry except for this axe. Right arm, right arm, right arm, right arm, right hand. The hell, here we go. So we have the axe and all of its associated animations. And then if we turn on the militia, we could think about, really we want that axe in his hand. It's close, but it's not exactly. And if we can manage to put that in his hand over here, that might make it look better. Let's see if I can sort of navigate around that. Get it like up here. So it's really like in his hand, which seems like a good thing. So he's holding it. Now how does that look? So here's our guy. Stand animation, he's an archer. Okay, and it's playing at high speed for some reason. Let's go to normal speed. So stand animation, he's an archer. Attack animation, he's an archer shooting his bow. He's doing his careful aim there. But then when you go to stand alternate 1, now he's an axe wielder, and he's still got his quiver on his back. And so you could imagine in a similar way, like I was saying, you could put like a bow on his back, similar to how he had a quiver on his back. But by default, we have just mentioned the quiver on his back. And so then he has these animations, stand alternate 2, stand victory alternate, where he's doing whatever that is, and attack alternate, where he's swinging with this axe. And while he's doing that, he doesn't have the bow in his other hand. Attack alternate 2, walk alternate, and you can see, maybe he's kind of animating as if he thought he had a shield in that walk alternate. So you could think about that. Similar to defend, okay, so he's got this defend animation, defend alternate, where there's nothing there. Doesn't totally make sense, but is that. So it is a little bit interesting to see in the death animation that the axe is not really ending up where you want it to. So because it's inherited to his hand, and his hand is a different length or height or something than the hand of the original guy that we copied from, it ends up in the wrong place in the death animation. So that's kind of the downside of this transfer. But I think if you picture, if the axe had been relative to center, and if its animation had preferred landing on the ground over being in his hand, and then you'd have a lot more work to do to try to fix it to be in his hand. And I think that seems kind of silly. So we could go in and try to actually fix that so that when he dies, the axe actually lands on the ground. As I'm sure you would imagine, there are some different ways to do that, and it can kind of be a waste of time. It's another one of these sort of reforged isms that isn't really a problem you would have had, I don't think, in the old days in classic Warcraft 3, because they didn't just play around with infinite amounts of translation processing for the computer, and instead there would be a ground axe and a hand axe, and so there'd be 2 copies, and when he dies it would show the other copy, which then you could easily also transfer between files or something. So anyway, I guess that's all pretty good. I would say, in terms of the things we're viewing here, it looks good except for that one thing where the axe falls to the wrong place. So you'd want to save this before you muck it up. So this is going to be militia with bow alternate to axe, or something like that, right? If we go into the edit section here, obviously it's been really lagging for me today on this computer I'm on, in the animation editor, but if we go to death alternate, we look at, when he falls, where does this axe land? You can see I actually render this kind of stupid long line between the guy and the axe, because we know that the ending position of the axe is a transform against starting in his hand, which is, again, it's just this like waste of processing Reforgedism, instead of just having 2 axes and one of them is just on the ground. So obviously you can go in here frame by frame and you can try to say, hey, actually I meant for this to be on the ground. In a lot of cases, that might kind of sort of work. Might look a little bit stupid because it's relative to his hand, and when his hand moves, the axe moves. And the original Reforged data, because they don't have 2 axes, when his hand moves, the axe doesn't move. So there's some weirdness going on there, but now it's ending up on the ground. If you really wanted to, and you want to, similar to my idea about inheriting the axe from his hand so the transfer is easy, if you wanted to go all the way to formatting it like classic so it would actually just fit the game engine better, you could just make 2 axes, and you could have the axe when he dies not inherit from his hand, and then you wouldn't have this kind of problem where, as his body moves, the axe in the air moves likewise, which is just kind of almost a programming glitch. But I just didn't really feel like fixing that right now. So what I'm going to do is just copy this falling position where the axe lands and make sure by using Control C on that, if I go to sort of decayed flesh over here or whatever, and just go to this animation where that has its kind of set position, paste that, now it's going to always be in that same position on the ground. Paste them start and the end both, so those are kind of in keeping with each other. And then I think decay bone looks like it appears to have a very similar problem, so we can kind of do that. So that kind of makes it a little bit same. I think it looked like when he's holding a bow and he dies, it didn't really have that problem. Let me see. Let's see. Yeah, like the archer death doesn't look that bad. I guess another interesting problem, and this is something that I just know from my experience on Warcraft, this thing automatically got named Decay Bone Alternate. Actually, bone is not a keyword. It's kind of like one. It's just some flair they threw in that the game engine doesn't process. So this is going to operate the same as Decay 1 Alternate. And as soon as the game engine sees something like the 1 or the 2 that actually has no meaning and it's just a comment for the developer, everything after it gets ignored. Because of that, Decay Bone Alternate actually does not function properly. It's the same as Decay. It's not treated the same as Decay Alternate. So by renaming that Decay Alternate Bone, we're going to actually fix a visual error that would otherwise happen. And it's kind of unfortunate that nothing tells you that, but that's sort of how the game works. So by fixing that, hopefully make things better. As far as I know, the keyword Decay Flesh is actually used and has a meaning independently. So I think you don't need to likewise change Decay Flesh Alternate to Decay Alternate Flesh. Decay Alternate Bone, you do want to change that way. Now, is this axe going nuts over here? Did we break it? So one of the things is sometimes in Retro Model Studio, when you paste a position of something, it'll cause it to vibrate a little bit. And that's pretty stupid. That's kind of my own fault, but it looks like it's not a big issue. Alright, so I think we could save this. We could save this as militia with bow alternate to axe, fix, or something. It's kind of sort of the final version. Now, when you actually go and import this into Warcraft 3 game, it will not work in Reforged. And I think sometimes that's really frustrating for people. They spend all this time and then they try to just put it in the game and we think that it just works, but it turns out sometimes the game just rejects the file that you've created. So based on my experience, the reason why I would expect that to happen, we can find this if we look for SMD. So there's just this kind of stupid problem on Warcraft 3 that if you have an event object with no data, like how these are just event track 0 and they're just event track 0, these actually sort of break stuff. So what we probably want to do is make them not break stuff. And that means that these zeros should not be what they are. They should be some kind of time value. So if you look at like DRAN, the Ranger death sound, and when that plays, maybe we want to play the peasant death sound at the time of the Ranger death sound instead, so this character sounds like a peasant when he dies. I mean, I think that might be similar with, the Death Bandit over here that's playing at these two different times. Really, we want Death Peasant at those times. And the game engine doesn't like the way that Retro Model Studio creates this like empty one basically it comes about because of the clear pre-existing animations function that we used. The clear pre-existing animations function has messed up these footprints, and so we want to make those footprints spawn at the same time as the sort of equivalent ones from the archer. Just basically that way we don't have as much problems. And similar, I think the whatever this SPL Elven blood stuff, human blood small, human blood large. These are just little like blood spats on the ground if you have that turned on. I'm not even really sure if it's used too much, but let's put it in there. Some of these, what, 1580, 1603. I'm out of order with this, by the way. I don't think it matters very much, though. So, they're probably slightly out of order. Maybe, if you think about 3 splats on the ground, maybe they'll spawn them a different order now than what they historically would have. I don't really care. We also need to delete SNDX arep. If you just grab this blob and delete it, that'll create trouble because it has a unique object ID identifier, and that ID will offset all the ones below it. Like if I delete 149, I would have to manually change 150 to 49, 51 to 50. That's really boring. So instead, we want to apply it back so we can get back into the program, and then go back and just basically delete the ones that we don't want over here. So we have way more event objects than we actually need. Sound X, this thing, wait, what? Something selected. So I selected nothing. Okay, so sound repair. So this is the repair sound. It's unlinked because there's no animation for it, because we deleted this. So by deleting that, oh, I guess I can't delete it when I'm in animation mode. So we gotta go back to geometry mode here. Delete the node. You also want to delete the ranger death sound because now we linked it up so that we'll play a peasant death sound. Same with death bandit sound. We don't need that. We've taken its time and transferred it to peasant. That should have been automatic. It's really silly that there's not a way in the wizard to automatically do that. Then we have the footprints and the spawns of the peasant. So I actually went and kind of used the footprint times from the archer and copied those into the peasant manually. I didn't get the ones from the bandit copied into the time of the peasant, I don't think. So maybe we'll leave those, but it should be fine probably. So we kind of have some of the bandit animations. Maybe he uses bandit footprints, the peasant ones. Maybe we have peasant footprints. It's probably fine. I think this would be the time where you would want to test this in the game. You know, just give it a new name, make a nice backup there. I'm actually on a computer that's not Windows, so I can't test it in the game, but it would be a good idea to do that. I guess the closest I can probably get to testing in the game, you know, I was trying to, some people might know this, but I was trying to see if I could rewrite the game, so I didn't have to deal with Reforged code anymore. So if we actually run this in run viewer, I think I should be able to actually open this model. Well, maybe not. I was trying to think if I could open this model in a viewer that's going to actually work a little bit better than Render Model Studio, this other program I was writing. I think it's not set up for Reforged right now. I might have to change that. If I go into what? Are any of these actually for this machine? Probably not. Probably not. I don't know. Yeah, it looks like I just don't have a way to test it. But I mean, I think the principle is pretty straightforward. If you actually have a problem with the model, so you know, if you run it in the game and try my exact tutorial and find like, hey, that doesn't work. One thing that everybody always suggests is to go to viewer.hiveworkshop.com/check. Wow, I really got some lag going on here. Check gets you to the sanity tester program, so you can actually test the file. Yeah, I don't know. I think this. Okay, that thing failed. I guess it's just using a lot of processing to run Render Model Studio on my computer, because this computer doesn't have a graphics card, which is just slowing it down a little bit. So I'm going to actually close Render Model Studio now. Cool. Okay, so now that I've closed that, maybe I can actually use the internet. Hopefully. Better. I must have spelled it wrong. Viewer.hiveworkshop.com. Okay, well, surely hiveworkshop.com exists, right? Or did I get kicked off the internet? Maybe I got kicked off the internet. Oh, okay. Well, alright, so if you don't have the internet, it's a little bit harder to do that, but if you did have the internet, you could use the Hive Workshop sanity tester. There's a whole bunch of links you can find the sanity tester, and it basically prints out if something's wrong with your model. So that'd be another way to check it if you didn't have the game ready to go. Alright, so hopefully I've helped you guys. I guess, you know, I didn't spend a lot of time explaining how to make the axe on his belt like the quiver, but I think hopefully it's a really similar process, if that makes sense what's happening. It would hopefully be very easy to do. So yeah, hope you guys have a good one.